Hello, and welcome into another episode of the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you so much for clicking on the show. I'm your host, Don Kleppen. And if it's your first time here, welcome. This is a show where we're taking a journalistic look at all things cannabis. That's what I like to do anyway. I'm a broadcaster in Chicago. I do news on WGN Radio. You can hear me Saturday mornings during House Smarts with Lou Manfredini and during Home Sweet Home Chicago afterward with David Hochberg. I also do traffic for iHeartMedia. You can hear me on stations around the Midwest, just giving some traffic information. That's kind of my day job. And eventually I decided to take my broadcasting skills and move them into this booth I have at home and try to change a little bit of the conversations that I saw and heard around cannabis once it became legal, not just here in Illinois back in 2019, recreationally that is. It had been medicinally for longer, as it had been in many other U.S. states. But even though this patchwork legalization movement has been moving forward for the last decade plus, we're still very much dealing with the lingering stigma against cannabis, the propaganda of reefer madness from the 1900s. It's still very much alive and well today. And so even though cannabis is something that it's a plant people have been using for so many reasons for thousands of years, there is still this resistance. And as I'll talk about later in the show, support for legalizing cannabis across the country here in America is higher than ever. There's a new Gallup poll out which has a figure higher than it's ever been before. But that does not mean that there is not still an equally negative reaction to that on the other side. And we saw ample evidence of that as well earlier this week in a story that I'm going to get to later on this episode. I also want to share with you my strain of the week, something I always like to do, tell you which cannabis products that I've been sampling and kind of give you my review of those. And of course, I have a wonderful interview with two lovely gentlemen from a southern state where, as we kind of delve into cannabis is legal up to a point and then illegal after that in terms of percentages of various cannabinoids. So I'm going to be talking with a few gentlemen from FlowGardens in Tennessee, and they have some really, really fascinating insight into the kind of work they're doing down there and to how those limitations of what THC percentages they're allowed to have in Tennessee, how that has led to some real-world innovations that they have created because they had to work within those limits of legality. So that is a bit of what I've got coming up for this episode. And if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and scroll down and hit that subscribe button. Support the show if you like. There are links down in the description notes, however you're listening to this, on Spotify, on Apple, wherever you get your podcasts. If you scroll down into the description notes, you can see links to the Buzzsprout page where you can become a subscriber and support the show. It really means a lot to me. It helps me continue doing this week to week because, as I've mentioned before, this is just something that I'm doing on my own, and it really, really helps to have some support from listeners like you. Of course, you can always follow the show as well at C-Man Podcast on X and Instagram and YouTube, and search the Cannabis Man Podcast on Facebook. You can also just reach out to me at donkleppin.com, Kleppin. And if you want to reach out about the show or any voiceover work you might need or anything else, feel free to reach me. I'm always happy to hear from listeners to the show. So with that, let's get into this episode of the Cannabis Man Podcast.
This is Tommy Chong, and you're listening to the Cannabis Broadcast.
Yes, indeed. This is the Cannabis Man podcast. Thank you, Tommy Chong, for reminding everybody. If you haven't had a chance to listen to my interview with the godfather of pot himself, Mr. Chong, listener, do yourself a favor and go back to April of this year and listen to that episode. He has some amazing insight and perspective because this is somebody who's obviously been in the game for so long and he's experienced such a shift in attitude. Some of the stories that he tells from back in the 70s and 80s when him and Cheech were just kind of getting up and going, I was just glued to the edge of my seat, and I'm sure you will be as well. Listener, I've got my cup of coffee right here in front of me. If you haven't heard before, I'm a big fan of the combination of cannabis and coffee. I just love the way that those two substances dance kind of together in my system, and everyone has their own kind of combination of things that they like to lean on, I think, to get us through the days, and this is something that whenever I have the opportunity, which is not every day, but whenever I do have the option to partake in this, that is something I always like to do. So cheers, whatever this is, morning, evening, afternoon, whenever you're listening to this. Thanks for listening, and cheers to you. Have a great day. I hope that doesn't bother anybody, by the way, when I'm slurping my coffee into the mic. I haven't gotten any messages or negative feedback about it, so if it is something that bothers you, feel free to let me know. C-Man Podcast on X and Instagram. But it is something I just like to reinforce, that I do have the cup of coffee here, and I'm just starting my day, getting in the booth before work starts, and I'm recording this episode the morning of November 9th. This is a Thursday. It's about 9:30 in the morning, and I'm here, and I wanted to share with you my strain of the week. Now, the cannabis products that I've been imbibing this week, the stuff I've been smoking on and trying, all are courtesy of FlowGardens from Tennessee, and that's the company from which my guests today are joining us. I wanted to sample some of their products before I spoke with them, and I wanted to give you a little insight into what my review of those products are. Now, one of the stipulations that they deal with in Tennessee, and you'll hear more about this in our interview, but what they do in Tennessee is they are under the umbrella of the Farm Bill, which means that they have the threshold of that 0.3% of THC that they need to stay under in order to comply with legal laws down there. And as you'll hear Erich and David talk about, that has led to some fascinating innovations on their part. They ended up focusing on other cannabinoids rather than just the THC. And I think that really is an exciting development, and it's something that I do think other companies are going to start focusing on as well as legal cannabis moves forward. You and I know, listener, right now that there is a focus on THC, and there are several reasons for that, not the least of which is the financial incentive that these businesses have when they can charge you and I a higher premium for a THC product that's over 25 or 30%, which is what they're legally allowed to do. In every state with recreational adult use cannabis that's legalized, they are allowed to charge us a premium for higher percentage THC. And because of that, you have these businesses that are fixated on high THC products. The other side of that, the ugly truth, and something that we're sort of dealing with right now, is that when you jack up that THC percentage, that's where you kind of run into these panicky and anxiety-inducing strains that are getting people into these problematic situations where, you've heard me talk about on this show, people going to emergency rooms in different states and complaining about these problems when they're trying cannabis for the first time in a state like Ohio that just legalized cannabis. And congrats, by the way, Ohio. Yeah, we got the 24th state in this union now is legally allowing adults to recreationally use cannabis there. So bravo, Ohio voters, for joining the ranks of the Midwest states and all the states in the union here that have legalized cannabis for adults. I think it's wonderful. And so, anyway, getting back to the topic at hand, these people that are newly trying cannabis in states that have just legalized it, like Ohio, there are going to be people that have never tried cannabis there because they never wanted to dabble in an illegal substance. Now that it's legalized, there are going to be a whole wave of people trying this for the first time. And those people are likely going to be exposed to a product that has high THC percentage because some company wants to put that on the shelf and charge a higher percentage, and then their profit margin goes up. The problem for that unsuspecting person is they have no idea what they're getting into, and they're likely going to be sitting in a corner, panicking, talking to themselves, waiting until this unexpected roller coaster ride ends. That's the kind of stuff that they're avoiding at FlowGardens by fixating on these other cannabinoids, and you'll hear them talk about that in more detail. What I wanted to share with you was my thoughts on their product, and I'll start with the product that I'm smoking right now, which is Lemon Cherry Sherbert, and I'm a big fan of the name, big fan of the taste as well, and I'll give you a little bit of my thoughts about that right after I take this first hit. So cheers to you. Yay! Yay. Great stuff, Lemon Cherry Sherbert. This is an indica. It has more of an earthy smell. It's also fresh and lemony, but earth is kind of what stood out to me off the front, which was unexpected based on the name. I was really expecting kind of a fruity smell. And again, you do taste and smell the lemony when you get that limonene terpene in there. But the feelings that I had mostly are spacey from this, and you kind of first feel it set in behind the forehead. At least that was my experience. Another product that they sent and I was able to try was Paradise OG. This flower was piney, clean smelling, almost like you could feel the pine needles underneath your feet as you were walking through some forest grove or something. It was great. This gave me up energy, not like an indica. This was more sprightly, positive, upbeat. I found this to be mostly clear-headed for me. That's how I stayed as I imbibed, and I found the high kind of setting in by my temples and the center of the head, also kind of the sinus areas a little bit, the sinus pockets that you've got in your face. I kind of felt the buzz in those from time to time. Nothing that stuck around like that, and it wasn't anything that was like bothering me, but I did kind of notice like the buzz, or after a while I did notice the high sort of like behind my face or like under those sinus cavities there. And they also sent me an Artisan pre-roll, a nice joint pre-roll that was a gram in there, and that was a THCA CBD blend. And this was definitely my favorite. I felt it most in the temples and behind the eyes, and it led me to get some wonderful sleep. I can't stress that enough. The sleep I got that night was just absolutely wonderful. I'm definitely looking forward to getting more of this stuff and getting myself some good night's sleeps. I'm going to try and stack a few nights of great sleep, as many as I can before this baby comes and those go out the window. So that's kind of what my thoughts on FlowGardens products were. As I mentioned, the THCA CBD blend, that Artisan pre-roll joint, was my favorite. I loved the Paradise OG and the Lemon Cherry Sherbert, and I am very much looking forward to trying out some of their other products. You'll hear them mentioned a little in the interview coming up. But man, what they're cranking out down there at FlowGardens is fantastic. And I wanted to know, what is your opinion about blends? Let me know at C-Man Podcast on X and Instagram. You can hit the show's website, cannabisman.buzzsprout.com, or the Cannabis Man Podcast on Facebook. Any way you choose to reach out, let me know. I really, really love hearing what you're enjoying out there in terms of cannabis products. Listener, strap in. We have a lovely treat this afternoon or morning or evening, whenever you might be listening to this. But my guests today, and I am doubling up as I sometimes like to do, my guests have a very interesting story. They both sort of did different paths in life. They walked different paths, doing different things in businesses, like a lot of us do, trying to, find some meaning in this, in this waking simulation we all got to go through. And at some some point they were introduced through a family friend, and it was sort of one of those right place, right time, serendipity moments. And the two of them came together to create a wonderful cannabis business called FlowGardens. And they're doing this, growing cannabis product, and they're making great things for all of us to try in a state where cannabis is still illegal fully, not like here in Illinois where it's medically and recreationally legal. They're doing this in Tennessee where there is no legal cannabis market yet when we're recording this in October of 2023. So here to tell us a little about FlowGardens and how they're able to make such wonderful cannabis products in a state that's still prohibiting it is Erich Maelzer and David Miller of FlowGardens. Welcome, Erich and David.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And you guys, you have an interesting story, and I'm so fascinated with FlowGardens and what you're able to do in a state like Tennessee, which is obviously not welcoming at all to cannabis right now. So far, it's illegal there. So, if you can, just tell us briefly about yourselves and how you got this business started.
Yeah, I'll start. This is Erich. I'm the founder, and I'm the grower over here at FlowGardens. So I've been growing cannabis now, I guess, close to 30 years on a hobby scale up until about 5 or 6 years ago when the federal government, they wrote the hemp bill to where now we can grow what's hemp, everything under 0.3 Delta 9 legally in the state, and that's how we're able to grow cannabis in this state. So about 5 years ago, it started growing indoors because the genetics were there. And ever since then, we've just worked hard on quality and genetics and different types of flower with different alternative cannabinoids. And so that's our main focus is the things that the people in the marijuana industry really don't focus on. Most of it's high THC. We kind of took a different road, and we focus on CBD, CBG, a bunch of different cannabinoids. So that's the space that we live in.
I appreciate that. And how about you, David? Erich mentions he's been growing for 30 years. How did you kind of come into this, what became FlowGardens?
Yeah, definitely a little bit different of a path. I've always enjoyed the plant. I'm originally from Knoxville, Tennessee, like Erich, born and raised here. And I moved to Atlanta after I graduated from college. I was in a completely different industry, finance and accounting, and sold my business to pursue something that I was super passionate about, being cannabis. And as you mentioned earlier, Erich and I had linked up through a family friend, and the rest is history. And just to kind of highlight what you were saying, and it's very common in the industry, is where people are saying that cannabis is illegal in Tennessee. There's a lot of people don't understand a lot of the laws going on, specifically the Farm Bill and a lot of the regulations. So cannabis is completely legal here in Tennessee if you understand the laws, if you have the right genetics, if you're doing things correctly with your R&D. So we're happy to dive into a lot of the nuances of that. But we're happy to be in a I guess quote illegal state that's forced us to do things a lot differently than your states like California, Colorado, the whole handful of them where it is medicinal or recreationally legal as far as marijuana is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for kind of clarifying that, because I am interested. I'm here, in Illinois where it's just sort of, they legalized recreationally in 2019. So, but I am familiar with the Farm Bill. And one of the things I love so much about it, and as you had kind of mentioned, David, by keeping your THC threshold for Delta 9 under that 0.3%, you're able to send products in the mail anywhere, which is amazing. And it obviously does sort of put you guys in a place where other cannabis businesses right now, a lot of focus is on THC percentage. And I've talked about it on the show before. I know a lot of why that is. It's unfortunate, but the incentive, because they can charge a higher premium for higher THC products, that incentive is there for a lot of businesses. But for you guys working in Tennessee, it allows you to focus in a different way on different other qualities of the plant rather than just the bottom line of the THC percentage. So maybe Erich first, I suppose, talk a little about what growing and cultivating, product and keeping it under that limit, entails and what else you focus on. And then David, maybe you could pick up on the business side of what that allows you guys to do in terms of sending products and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, on the growing side, it's definitely forced me to look at the plant differently and focus on different cannabinoids. I work with a bunch of different breeders around the country that'll send us seeds that we test out. And along the way, I've found type 2 flower, which is equal parts CBD and THC, or close to equal parts either way. And what we found is smoking this flower, or any way you want to take it, it kind of alleviates any of the anxiety or paranoia that high THC tends to have for a lot of people, especially older people. It's something that's very new and premature in the industry that I think is probably going to take over in the future. So that, and then the CBD flower in general, it's not psychoactive, so it's not going to get you high per se. It will give you a head change, but it's great for anxiety. It's great if you can't sleep. There's a lot of good medicinal value with CBD flower as well. So, like you said, it caused us to kind of take a different path and look at the plant differently, and it's been a blessing in disguise because we've learned quite a bit and collected quite a bit of data over the last couple of years.
Right on, and I appreciate that. It definitely sounds cool, and I've having now tried some of FlowGardens products. Really loved the Lemon Cherry Sherbert, by the way. Big fan of that. I also like the Paradise OG, and I'm looking forward to trying more. David, in terms of the business side of this, we were just kind of talking about like the semantics or the specifics, I guess, of THC and high THC in fully legal states. But as you point out, it's a nuance to talk about legality in Tennessee, where everything's legal up to that threshold, but then beyond it, it's not. In terms of business, what maybe opportunities or limitations does stuff like that offer FlowGardens?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's from a business aspect, it's really drilling down on those nuances from a compliance standpoint and understanding not just THC, but breaking that down with Delta-9 THC, THCA, what those different cannabinoids, those two specific cannabinoid levels are at certain stages of growth, and what the states allow federally and from municipal perspective for those two cannabinoids and how they can be distributed. So we have THCA products that are below the 0.3% Delta-9, and as you know, and probably a lot of listeners, that THCA, after heated or decarboxylated, converts to Delta-9 in a lot of cases. And so there's that piece that it gives us a advantage over the recreational and medicinal states. But also, what Erich had kind of mentioned is with the CBD is his genetics that he has bred here in-house and done in-house crosses of not just CBD and THC, but also CBG, THCV, CBDV, CBC. A lot of these alternative cannabinoids that don't have the popular psychoactive change, but do have a lot of medicinal benefits. It gives us a more well-rounded product. And I guess kind of an easy way to describe it is we're not just chugging moonshine. We're being very specific and finding, Pinot Noir from Willamette Valley that has, more diverse profile.
Right, gotcha, and I love that exactly. You guys, I think that paints a vivid picture the way you say it, where you're not just chucking moonshine down there. It's like it is a lot more scientific, and you kind of you got into that with this sort of alphabet soup of these new cannabinoids, like you're talking about, which the THCA and CBG, which are very exciting, and I do think that, as you pointed out, both of you, that this does seem like it's poised over the coming years to really become big in the cannabis industry, because we've always known, I think, that we've oversimplified our classifications of cannabis because of so many reasons. But a plant with hundreds of compounds being classified into, all right, it's either an indica or a sativa or a hybrid only. Obviously an oversimplification. And then even just only saying THC and CBD, those are two of hundreds of compounds. So I'm really excited for sort of the future of this. I do, we were just talking about these. Erich, on these medical benefits that we're talking about here, some of these new, or the compounds, not new, but newly discovered, let's say, and the ones with which you guys are working so intently, like CBG and like THCA, what are some of the benefits of those specifically compared with like a THC, the baseline?
Right. So I guess CBG, I'll start there. That one, it's the mother of all cannabinoids. So that's the first cannabinoid. It's the stem cell, and then it spins out in the plant through flower into all the other ones. But the CBD or CBG dominant plants don't do that, almost like a mutant. So when that flower's done, they get kind of technical. Instead of having like sticky, resiny trichomes, they're powdery and they're really white, so they fall off the plant easily. And when they're on your hands, it's almost like a lotion. It's not even sticky. When you smoke the CBG, I compare it to drinking a cup of coffee or a Red Bull. It's a immediate like energy boost. And so people, like a really heavy sativa without all the anxiety. So we have a lot of customers that'll mix that with their, THC flower, and they kind of do a blend to give them a more heightened effect. So that's that one. And then CBD, like I said, like a type 2 flower, when you put CBD and THC together, they interact, and the CBD dumbs down that paranoia, that really intense effect of it, but you still get the high that you're looking for. It's just more of a level-headed, smooth sailing high. And then the new cannabinoid that we run, we have a strain called skunk butter, and it's high in CBC, which is around 4%, which is the highest I've seen. We have a lot of customers that love mixing that with their THC flower, and they say it just intensifies it dramatically. So, I mean, those are just 30,000 foot view, just like easy effects that we've heard from our customers. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to all of them, mixing them together. We have one strain called Eraser V that has 11 different cannabinoids, including like THCV, which is the bear in the backside of the cannabinoids, and then CBDV. And people absolutely love it because you put all those together in one flower. When you smoke it, it's like an effect. It's an entourage effect that you can't experience with just THC flower alone.
Then you throw your terpenes on top of that, Erich, and it just expounds it even more.
Exactly. So, yeah.
Man, I love this so much. I mean, just this is some of the really exciting stuff about, cannabis as it's moving forward and being, thankfully and slowly, but surely normalized and destigmatized, is this ability to put together, to learn more about specific cannabinoids and what effects they have on you. And then the ability to customize exactly the feeling that you want, and then go and get products that can elicit those exact feelings. Being able to, as you were just describing, kind of dial in on like a CBG or a CBD flower that's even, and just knowing that is the kind of feeling you're after, as opposed to just grabbing whatever's on the shelf and then feeling panicky and anxious when you get home because the THC level is so high. I love what you guys are doing. I think this is great. I do want to mention, listener, Erich just mentioned skunk butter, which sounds amazing. In 2022, you guys were the High Times Cannabis Cup first place winner with blue cheese number 12. So obviously getting some accolades early on here. Very exciting. David, you came from a different space. You came from business, finance, very different vibe from the cannabis industry, I've got to imagine. As we move forward to destigmatize this, cannabis is still the patchwork legalization, and the attitudes, are still very much, there's still some lingering stigma from all the propaganda of last century, from the reefer madness, and when I talk about it on the show a lot. But how, from a business standpoint, and with your background coming from a place of like finance and much more buttoned up and sort of like an official business capacity, how do we go about killing this stigma? And how do we move this forward so that cannabis is more normalized?
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, that's a great question. First of all, the cannabis market is still in its infancy stage, so there's that element to having that wild, wild west component. But we're going to have to address things, and by we, I mean the industry, and that's where Erich is leading the way with his genetics and FlowGardens is that, like, take, for example, you have a medical pharmacy in a legal state. Why is it, Don, that they will not buy flower that has and this isn't every single case, but it's in almost every single case. Why will they not buy flower if it has a low THC content and it has a higher CBD content? Why do they not care that there's no CBC in the plant? Why do they not sell CBG flower? This is medicine. I get research has to evolve. You know, we need to get better studies, and I believe all that's coming, given we are in our infancy, like I said. But like, it's all like all the cynics and the naysayers and the reefer madness creators, like, that gives them ammunition to say that cannabis is a farce when it's clearly not. It's clearly medicine. But like, these medical pharmacies, they need to start carrying these alternative cannabinoids so people can't say, oh, they're just walking in there to get high and they don't care about anything else. Because it's, you know, that's probably the biggest thing. And I was able to take coming from an industry where, you know, the compliance just way, way, way too out of control, meaning there's a lot of it, to where in the, you know, cannabis industry, like, it's still got a long ways to go. So,
yeah. And Don, just to add to that, I have a question, or not even a question, just a statement I always say, like, because we're from an illegal state. And so I look out at these states that are considered medical medicine, right? Why would you, if it's medical, not want as many cannabinoids in that flower as possible? Doesn't that just, it makes no sense why you would just want one. That's not medicine. You know what I mean?
Right. You guys both bring up great points. I mean, that's a great question. In terms of the high THC, why these medical facilities aren't interested in higher CBD than a THC percentage, and as Erich pointed out at the end, why only a single compound? Why fixate on the THC versus all these other cannabinoids? And I wonder if it's not ignorance. It's certainly a lack of understanding, I think, on the part of so many people who are now in positions of making policies, you know, and legalizing these things. And, you know, David mentioned that the research is coming. There's more on the way. I was just speaking with someone from Normal, and he was talking about the research that's you know, that has been done, that is being done, and it is exciting, but it is something that I think it's a troubling trend in the cannabis industry right now, and we're still in our infancy, as you guys have mentioned. It's problematic to me that there's this fixation on THC, because it almost is like it's a setup for a fall down the line where THC is the end-all, be-all from like legal businesses, and yet so many people, media, you know, publications who want to perpetuate the reefer madness and the stigma, they can point to all the problems from high THC products and say, see, this is what we told you, when in reality, the problem is an imbalance of those cannabinoids. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, not to poo-poo on THC. I'm a big fan of it. It's just, you know, there needs to be a balance there. Kind of the whole moonshine Pinot Noir example. It's like, you don't need to go to one extreme. Find something in the middle for some moderation.
Yeah, especially in a medicinal state. I mean, recreational, I get it. Even still, though, I enjoy type 2 flowers because I don't like sitting in a corner with paranoia, thinking our heart's going to explode, you know?
I think we've all been there. I think we've all had that time, a bad high, and of course it's not fun, you know? Nobody wants that, and certainly not from something you're turning to as medicine, you know? And
right, exactly.
Yeah, so I completely agree with you there. You mentioned, Erich, before that you do the indoor growing now. Can you just walk us through a little bit of the grow philosophy that you have at FlowGardens, and, you know, why indoor you found was sort of the way to go?
Yeah, of course. So I've always been an indoor grower. I tried an outdoor grow back in the mid '90s and realized that wasn't especially in Tennessee, we've got terrible weather for outdoor growing. So I converted the indoor, and I love building grows, and it's just as much as I do growing the plant. It's just designing, trying to recreate Mother Nature. And so, last 3 years I've grown everything from an attic to a basement to a closet to a crawl space, you name it. And then now this facility, I have a chance to we turned it into an R&D facility because I want to find the best way to grow this plant and do it efficiently and then do it with the highest quality. So at FlowGardens, we have multiple different types of grow rooms. We have a organic living soil room. We have a top feed drip room. We have actually 3 of those. Flood and drain room, and then even a recirculating deep water culture room. So those are all different forms of hydroponics. And then we run the same genetics through all of them and kind of take data and see what the different intricacies are with the plant. One interesting thing we found in deep water culture, the plants tend to be 4 to 6% higher cannabinoids, which is pretty crazy. But you lose a little bit of the flower. It doesn't grow as big, but it's definitely the highest quality. So that's kind of what we do here. We're just trying to figure out the best way to grow this plant most efficiently until finally we can grow everything here legally.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I the hydroponic style of growing, I'm definitely curious. I've been interested about that, comparing it with sort of traditional grow setups. And that's very fascinating that you found that there was sort of a higher concentration of cannabinoids, in that percentage range just from hydroponic versus traditional grows. David, in terms of selling these, I'm just kind of wondering, I mentioned the blue cheese number 12. I mentioned the Paradise OG as well as the Lemon Cherry Sherbet. I love all of those. What are, Erich just mentioned like the hydroponics and stuff. Are there any products that people can get from FlowGardens right now that are some of these hydroponically grown? Or, what are you excited about in terms of products that are coming down the line? Anything that you can talk about, I mean?
Yeah, as far as what's doing really well right now, and it's a staple with our genetics, is Erich's Bob. It's called BOB, Body Odor Berries. And it smells like it sounds. It has, some people are turned off by the name of it, but when you smell it, it's got such a unique smell, and that is one of our, type 2, so it's got equal parts CBD and THCA, and that has been a huge fan for a lot of the Reddit subs that actually understand the cannabinoid and terpene profiles for the plant. So I think Bob has around 3.5% terpene, which is probably 3 to 4 times the industry average of terpene levels.
Yeah.
And as far as what's coming down the line, as far as new crosses are concerned, there's a handful of one-to-ones that we have and some other alternative cannabinoids that we have. We've got to continue growing them out and testing them and letting our customers try them and get surveys and feedback from them. But we definitely don't have a shortage of new things coming out because that's where he thrives.
Yeah, one of my favorites is type 2. We have it's called it's Point Break, which is a THC strain crossed with OZK, and it's a beautiful purple flower. It's glistening, but the flavor on it is like a blueberry peanut butter and jelly sandwich, which sounds crazy. But everybody I say they smell it and they're like, "Oh my God, you're right." And another thing I look for, they can look great and smell great, but the last check box is if it tastes great. If you get that same flavor that you're smelling when you smoke it, that's what I look for when I have a keeper.
Oh man, yeah, that's huge and very well said too. Because that's something that I've talked with a lot of people about is that difference between what you smell when you open the jar and kind of the taste, and it can be tough. I know some people have talked about the combustion element, but it's like I'm fully there with you. If I can taste what I'm smelling, I'm so on board for that. I love it. So on that, David mentioned mentioned the terpenes and kind of the profile of some of what you guys have. I'm not super well versed on some of the differences between them, but something I have found over the last couple of months trying to pay more attention is that I'm a big fan of limonene. I for whatever reason, the strains that highlight that smell kind of and that feeling of them, that kind of speaks to me. Can you just maybe pick one or two terpenes that you vibe with, and maybe if you can tell us about what's unique about those, or if any of your strains have high terpene concentrations, what can people feel from those? What's good about them?
So we've kind of dove down that path now to where we're dissecting them all as we try them to see the different effects and how they interact. The limonene and the pinene are big favorites of mine. I just love those flavors, but they're also very energetic when you smoke it in the flower. Those two are probably my favorites.
And David, I want to be sure I can cut this out if you can't, but I'm just wondering, because of the THC threshold, can anybody go online and order FlowGardens products to be shipped wherever?
Yeah, we ship to all 50 states, and with the new laws, like that Lemon Cherry Sherbert you had, I think it was around 20% THCA under 0.3 Delta 9, so we can ship it right to your door.
That's amazing. Where can people go to try some of these excellent quality products that FlowGardens is churning out?
You can go to our website, FlowGardens.com.
Beautiful. And listener, let me just recommend that highly, because you really owe it to yourself to try some of these things. I have some other ones, other products that I can't wait to get to as well. And I really look forward to what Erich and David have coming down more with FlowGardens in Tennessee. I think you guys are focused on the right stuff, and it sounds like your approach is excellent. And I think that not before too long, the brand is going to be synonymous with this quality, and people will be excited about it as the cannabis industry continues to become more normal and legal and all of that. So really appreciate you guys taking the time today, and keep doing what you're doing. I hope we can talk again.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Don. We appreciate it, and we'll take that to heart and try and keep on reach your expectations.
Yeah, thanks for having us on here, Don. We really appreciate it. Just trying to get the word out, trying to educate people on this beautiful plant.
And there you have it, listener. I really want to thank one more time my guests, Erich and David from FlowGardens. What they're doing down there is fantastic, and I can't wait to try more products. And head to FlowGardens.com if you want to order some of those yourself. Like they said, wherever you are in the good old US of A, you can order some of those, and they'll be shipped right to your door. And I really can't recommend it enough. And this is an unpaid endorsement. I was able to try some of their stuff, but they are not paying me to say this. This is just a product that I really enjoyed as much as I did, and I hope you try it yourself. Something else I wanted to bring to your attention today: support for marijuana legalization reaches record high of 70%, including strong majority of Republicans. This is according to a new Gallup poll. I found this on Marijuana Moment, a publication, if you've listened to the show, you know I rely on for their excellent news coverage about cannabis developments. And they're saying, this article by Kyle Yeager that was put out this week, the survey was put out Wednesday, so just yesterday from when I'm recording this. It shows the support for legalization is at its highest level since Gallup started tracking public opinion on the issue in 1969. Overall, 70% of respondents say they back legalization, which is a 2 percentage bump from last year. Meanwhile, just 29% of Americans think cannabis should remain illegal. And something important to note, Gallup found no difference in support for legalization between people living in states that have already enacted the reform and those living in states where cannabis is only medically legal or altogether still criminalized. 70% of adults in both groups are in favor, again, according to Gallup. And I won't read the rest of the article, but I will link it in the show description notes. And as I always encourage you to do, feel free to scroll down and read it for yourself. And check out the Gallup poll as well. Go to the source. Their findings are very, very interesting. But I also want to bring up to your attention that note there, the 29% of Americans that still think it should remain illegal. As I mentioned at the top of the show, the stigma and the attitude about about this, the pushback against cannabis, even though 70%, as we just found out, are in favor of this, which is a majority that you don't see politically in this country. If a president ever got 70% approval rating, they would parade nude in the streets. I promise you, there would be just an exorbitant celebration, because that is a ratio you never see. Somebody can't get 70% of America to agree on anything just because of all the different opinions. And, it's a great country with so many different groups. People don't agree as a monolith. There's just too many people and too many different, sort of walks of life. They've had different experiences. So 70% is major. But the 29% that are against it, they still fiercely, vehemently oppose this. And what I wanted to bring to your attention is something else that came out this week. And it's related to my discussion with Paul Armentano of Normal last episode. If you haven't heard it, highly encourage you to go check that out. But Paul and I discussed these media narratives that come out from publications, as I've mentioned before, like CNN. But as Paul said, there's plenty of other examples, maybe none so loud or with such an audience as like CNN, but there are many, many examples of publications that almost gleefully run with anti-cannabis slant. And one of those that I found out this week, at least in my opinion, now you can form your own opinion about this, but the American Heart Association released an article that screamed on the headline, "Marijuana use linked with increased risk of heart attack and heart failure." And it goes on to cite this study, which I went through, and I'm going to try and find someone to talk about this more deeply. The study itself specifically, because I do have some problems with it. One of those being that all who took part, all the authors, self-reported any potential conflicts of interest with no independent review of that. And that always leaves me feeling a little bit skeptical, because who would self-report a conflict of interest? I just don't think that is going to happen. So when you kind of scroll down to the bottom of the study and you look into potential conflicts of interest and you see all the authors just with none listed in their box, and there's like 30 some authors or whatever of this. So my point being that's one of those. The other part of it is that they did not distinguish in the study between those who reported, who were in the group that consumed cannabis, those that they're saying had an increased risk for these problems in the heart. They did not distinguish between edibles and smoking the cannabis. They didn't distinguish as to how the cannabis was consumed. And that, to me, obviously would play some kind of role. So that, to me, is another sort of factor that would speak to maybe a faulty data collection or a flaw in the study. But anyway, I just wanted to bring this up because, again, Paul and I were discussing just last week as to how some publications seem to so consistently come down on one side or the other on the issue of cannabis. And as soon as this American Heart Association study came out, of course, CNN was blaring that headline and sounding the alarm again the next day. And so this is just kind of what I want to leave you with, listener, is that even though as exciting as it is that this Gallup poll shows 70% of Americans are in favor of this, and on that note, a Republican, Nancy Mace, she filed a bill last month to federally legalize cannabis. And it is different in some major ways to other recent bill submissions to do the same thing. So it is interesting to see all this support, and the momentum is there, and there's a lot to be excited about. But this stigma is still out there. And as Paul pointed out last week, and as I always say on the show, what matters in terms of how we can end this stigma eventually, what matters is how we talk about this plant. What matters is how this topic is discussed and the kind of cultural baggage that was strapped to it during the Reefer Madness years and with all the propaganda. Those negative connotations have still trickled down to today. And this negativity on the part of CNN or any of these other publications that you see always kind of sounding the alarm about cannabis and always seeming to come down on the negative side, That is kind of what we're talking about. That still is the lingering stigma. That's not neutral and unbiased reporting. That is very much sticking to one narrative. That is very much peddling one side of the story and trying to keep in your mind the alarmist view of, hey, this plant it's all risk and no reward. And we just know that that's not the case. But it is something to be wary of going forward in the future. And that's why it matters so much how we talk about this plant. That affects our thoughts, that affects our actions, that affects what ultimately is done in Washington, D.C. from a top-down political policy level, at the federal level. That's where that ultimately changes. How we talk about it changes how we think, changes how we act. So that's how I feel about that, but let me know what you think. Do you agree with me, or do you think that I'm completely wrong? Reach the show at C-Man Podcast on X and Instagram, or YouTube. You can find the Cannabis Man Podcast on YouTube, Facebook, and the new show website is cannabisman.buzzsprout.com. And if you're able, go ahead and scroll down and hit that support the show link, and it'll take you to the Buzzsprout subscriber page. Become a supporter, and I will shout out your name in the episode credits because it makes you a part of the show just like I am, and I can't do this without you. So thanks so much for listening. I'll be back again next week. I'm talking to somebody from Cresco Labs, and I got a lot of great stuff talking about their vast array of brands here in Illinois and around the country. All of that coming up on the Cannabis Man Podcast. Bye-bye. Cannabis Man is 100% originally crafted by myself, Don Kleppen. Original theme music written and composed by Yusu Kim, aka Goodson.